You're not alone here. Whatever just happened doesn't define you. Let's leave and start this night over.
Angie Hart always knew she couldn't trust Araceli, her twin sister, physically identical, but opposites in everything. But when Araceli begged, "Please, go in my place, just this once, I'm sick," Angie gave in. It was the biggest mistake of her life, because it wasn't a regular date. It was a setup. Wear an ugly dress, no makeup, with instructions to be shy and vulnerable. But the worst was yet to come. Public humiliation with a bucket of water. A paid accident. All in front of Vincent Ballard, one of the richest men in the country. Araceli had a wicked plan, but what she didn't expect was that Vincent, instead of laughing, would protect Angie. Because something told him that wasn't Araceli, at least not the one he knew. A romance was born, built on a lie. And while Angie fell in love, Araceli only saw an opportunity to take advantage of the millionaire. And believe me, that was just the beginning. And I'm going to tell you everything in this story.
Hello, how are you? I'm Kay, the creator of this channel. And today I want to thank the comments from Ellington and Sahara. Thank you so much for all the support always, guys. And if you want your comment to appear in the next video, answer me real quick. Can a real romance be born from a lie? Seems unreal, but that's what we're about to see.
Chapter 1. Cruel setup and unexpected protection.
That wasn't an accident, and when I find out who did this, everything changes.
Angie Hart knew she was making a mistake the moment she agreed, but Araceli's voice had that desperate tone that always managed to make her give in, even when every instinct screamed to refuse. Her twin sister was leaning against her bedroom door, arms crossed and wearing that expression that mixed pleading with something darker, something Angie preferred not to name. "Please, Angie, I'm sick, I can't go," Araceli practically begged. And if it weren't for the calculating gleam in her eyes, identical to her own, Angie might have actually believed her. "Vincent's going to be furious with me. You don't understand. He's kind of abusive sometimes, you know. If I cancel again, he's going to lose it." Angie felt her stomach turn at the word abusive, because if there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was the idea of someone being mistreated, and her sister knew exactly that, knew exactly which string to pull to make her dance to the music. She sighed deeply, letting the book she was reading fall onto her lap as she looked at Araceli with a mixture of distrust and resignation that had become all too familiar over the years. "But why me, Araceli? Can't you just call him and cancel, make up a better excuse?" Angie tried, knowing she was fighting a losing battle, but she needed to at least try to resist before surrendering completely. "He doesn't accept cancellations. I've tried that before and he got furious." Araceli moved away from the door and walked to the bed, sitting on the edge with that theatrical drama that seemed as natural to her as breathing. "Please, sis, you'll pretend to be me just today, just this once. I owe you one, I owe you several, I promise." Angie bit her lower lip, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. And for a moment, she considered saying no, simply getting up and leaving the room. But then Araceli played the final card, the one that always worked. "You're my only real family, Angie. If you don't help me, who will?" And that was it. That simple, manipulative phrase that made Angie sigh in defeat, closing her eyes for a second before asking what she already knew she would ask. "What if he tries to kiss me? I mean, he's your boyfriend, isn't he?" "He won't do that," Araceli answered too quickly, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just say you have a canker sore and don't want to give it to him. Simple as that." "Fine," Angie murmured, feeling regret already settling in her chest like cold lead. "But you owe me big time for this. What do I wear?" That's when Araceli pulled a dress from the bag on the floor, and Angie felt the first real alarm go off in her mind, because the dress was simply hideous, a shapeless brown thing that looked like it came from a fifth-rate thrift store. She picked up the fabric between her fingers with barely disguised disgust, frowning as she looked at her sister for an explanation. Seriously, this doesn't look anything like your style, Araceli." Angie held the dress up to eye level, turning it from side to side as if hoping a different angle would make it less ugly. "It's a test," Araceli responded with that rehearsed quickness that gave away the lie. "But I want to see if he really wants me without all the glamour, you know, no makeup, simple hair, basic outfit, to find out if it's real love or just physical attraction." Angie knew she was being deceived, felt it in the way her stomach churned and how her intuition screamed danger. But at the same time, she couldn't imagine exactly what the plan behind all this was. So she ended up nodding, still holding the ugly dress with disgust. "Where's the date?" "LeBlanc Restaurant, 8 at night." Araceli stood up quickly, as if afraid Angie would change her mind. "And Angie, be yourself. Shy, quiet, vulnerable. He'll understand. He'll like that. Trust me." But Angie didn't trust her, and as Araceli left the room with a victorious smile on her lips, she stood there holding that horrible dress and wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into this time. The LeBlanc Restaurant was the kind of place Angie would never frequent on her own, all elegant and full of people who seemed to have been born knowing which fork to use for each course. And she felt completely out of place the moment she walked in, wearing that shapeless brown dress and with her hair simply pulled back in a basic ponytail. The looks she received didn't help at all, especially from the impeccably dressed women who analyzed her from head to toe with that kind of silent judgment that hurts more than words. She spotted Vincent Ballard immediately, because it was impossible not to spot him, sitting at a corner table in a suit that probably cost more than her 3 months' rent, all composed and with that neutral expression that could easily be mistaken for boredom or disinterest. He was reading the menu when she approached, and for a second Angie considered turning around and running out of there, but it was already too late. He had already looked up and seen her. "Vincent?" Her voice came out lower and shyer than intended, and she saw the immediate confusion on his face, that almost imperceptible furrowing of his brow that indicated something wasn't adding up. "Araceli," he responded, but there was a clear question in his tone, as if he wasn't sure he was really talking to the right person. His dark eyes traveled over her face, down the horrible dress, back to her simple hair, and she could see the calculations happening behind that penetrating gaze. "Yes, hi. Sorry I'm late." Angie sat down quickly, before her legs decided that running away was the best option, and immediately avoided his gaze, focusing on the menu as if it were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen in her life. "You look different," Vincent said after a moment, and it wasn't a question, it was an observation, a cold and direct statement that made Angie swallow hard. "Hair? Clothes? What changed?" "Wanted to change things up a bit," she murmured, still not looking at him directly, feeling the heat rise up her neck and knowing she was probably turning red. "Test something new." Vincent was silent for a moment that seemed to stretch for hours, and when Angie finally gathered the courage to look at him, she found those dark eyes still studying every detail of her face with an intensity that made her heart race. There was something in that gaze that left her breathless, something dangerous and fascinating at the same time, and she had to force herself to look away again. "Wine?" he offered, already signaling to the waiter, but Angie answered before she could censor herself, "Water, please. I don't drink much." The silence that followed was heavy, and she didn't need to look to know he was even more confused, probably going over all the times Araceli had drunk wine in front of him, because from his reaction, there must have been many. "Since when?" The question came loaded with suspicion, and Angie felt panic rise up her throat. "Since today," she improvised quickly, risking a glance at him and forcing a small smile. "I'm trying to be healthier." Vincent didn't seem convinced, but nodded and ordered water for her, and Angie took advantage of the moment of his distraction with the waiter to try to control her breathing and calm the heart that was beating erratically in her chest. She wasn't good at lying, never had been, and every second at that table was making her entire body scream in protest. The next 20 minutes were a strange torture, with Vincent asking questions that Angie didn't know how to answer, without giving everything away. And she found herself making mistake after mistake. He commented on how quiet she was, when apparently Araceli usually talked a lot, and Angie blamed it on work fatigue, only for him to point out that Araceli didn't work, that she lived off the family allowance. "I work. At the library," Angie responded automatically, completely forgetting that she was supposed to be pretending to be her sister, and only realized the mistake when she saw his expression change, that confusion turning into something closer to distrust. "I mean, I'm thinking of working volunteer work." "Libraries need volunteers." "Right," Vincent said slowly, and there was something in his tone that indicated he wasn't buying any of it, but before he could question further, he leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the table, and that sudden proximity made all the air escape from her lungs. "You're acting strange today, Araceli. Very strange." Angie opened her mouth to respond, to make up another excuse that probably wouldn't convince anyone. But that's when everything fell apart at once. The waiter approached their table carrying a tray, and in a movement that seemed to happen in slow motion, he tripped, and a full bucket of ice-cold water fell directly on Angie. Her scream echoed through the entire restaurant, shrill and desperate, because the water was absurdly cold, so cold that for a second she couldn't even breathe properly. The brown dress stuck to her body, heavy and uncomfortable, and she felt every pair of eyes in the restaurant turning in their direction, some people even laughing quietly, as if this were the night's entertainment. "Oh, sorry. It was an accident," the waiter said, but there was something too fake in his tone, and Angie was shaking too much to process anything beyond the absolute humiliation she felt as tears began to burn her eyes. But then Vincent stood up so fast, the chair almost tipped backward, and the expression on his face was something Angie had never seen before, a cold and contained fury that made the waiter instinctively take a step back. That was no accident. His voice came out low, dangerously controlled, each word cutting like glass. "How much did they pay you?" I don't know what you're—" The waiter tried, but Vincent took a step toward him, and the man visibly paled. "How much?" Vincent repeated, and this time there was no room for lies. The authority in his voice was absolute, and the waiter completely crumbled. 500. "A blonde woman paid me to trip. Sorry, sir, I need the money. I didn't—" Vincent cut him off with a wave of his hand, and then turned to Angie, and it was only when those dark eyes landed on her that she realized she was really crying. Silent tears running down her face as her entire body shook from cold and humiliation. She saw something change in his expression, the fury giving way to something softer, something that seemed almost protective, and before she could process what was happening, he was already taking off his blazer and placing it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, carrying the heat of his body and a masculine scent that made something strange happen in Angie's chest. And when his fingers lightly brushed her shoulders as he adjusted the blazer, she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Come on," he said, taking her hand with a gentle firmness that left her speechless. "We're leaving now." "But—" Angie started, but Vincent was already turning to the manager who had approached with an expression of absolute panic. "Put it on my tab. And this waiter—" Vincent pointed to the man who was still standing there like a statue. "Fired. Or I buy this restaurant and shut it down. Your choice." "Yes, Mr. Ballard. Immediately. 1,000 apologies." The manager practically bowed, and Angie barely had time to process the absolute power that Vincent clearly had, because he was already guiding her out of the restaurant, his hand still holding hers with that firmness that made her feel simultaneously protected and completely out of control. The cold night air hit her face as soon as they got out, and she shivered again, pulling his blazer tighter around her body. Vincent guided her to a car that looked like it cost more than her entire house, opening the passenger door and practically helping her in before walking around and sitting in the driver's seat. The silence inside the car was heavy, broken only by the sound of the engine starting and the heater being turned on. Angie couldn't stop shaking, and she didn't know if it was from the cold or the shock or the way Vincent looked at her from time to time, as if trying to decipher an impossible puzzle. "Are you okay?" The question came low, and there was genuine concern there that made Angie's chest tighten, and that's when everything she was holding in collapsed at once. The tears came back full force, and she couldn't hold back the sobs that escaped her throat anymore. "Tati," she admitted, her voice coming out broken and pathetic. "I'm not okay, that was horrible. I don't understand why someone would do that." Vincent was silent for a moment, and through her tears, Angie saw him grip the steering wheel hard, before releasing it and running his hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed frustrated. "I don't know either," he said finally, and there was something strange in his voice, as if he were lying or omitting something. "But you're not going back there. Never again. I'm taking you to my place. You take a shower, change clothes, and we talk, okay?" Angie knew she should refuse, that going to the house of a man she had just met and who thought she was her sister was probably the worst idea in the world. But she was too exhausted to argue, too humiliated to think straight. And there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart believe she would be safe. "Okay," she whispered. "Thanks for getting me out of there." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and Angie could swear she saw something change in those dark eyes, something that made the air between them become dense and charged with a tension she couldn't name. "Always," he said finally, and the word sounded like a promise, like a vow. And then he put the car in motion, and Angie closed her eyes, trying not to think about how she had just fallen a little bit in love with the man who was supposed to be dating her sister.
I think this was the craziest first chapter I've ever written, and the emotions of this unusual couple are just getting started.
Chapter 2. Real connection and confusion begins.
And I don't know if that scares me, Dell, or makes me want you even more.
If I tell him the truth?
Vincent Ballard's mansion was exactly the kind of place Angie imagined a man like him would live in, all elegant and minimalist with that touch of sophisticated masculinity that seemed to scream money and power in every corner. And she felt even more out of place there than at the restaurant, especially soaked and shivering inside that horrible dress that stuck to her body uncomfortably. He guided her through the wide hallways to a guest bathroom that was bigger than her entire bedroom, and Angie had to hold her breath when she noticed the discreet luxury of every detail. "There are towels here," Vincent said, opening a built-in cabinet that revealed perfectly folded stacks of towels that looked softer than anything Angie had ever touched in her life. He then moved to a smaller closet in the corner of the bathroom, opening the doors to show some women's clothing hanging there. "My sister Clarice's clothes. She leaves things here when she visits. Pick whatever you want. Take your time." Angie just nodded, not trusting her own voice at that moment, and saw when Vincent stopped at the door, turning to look at her once more with that intensity that made her stomach do strange flips. Thank you," she finally managed to say, her voice coming out hoarser than intended. "Seriously, for everything." Something changed in his expression, a kind of softness she didn't expect to see on that angular and controlled face, and for a second, Angie thought he was going to say something, but he just nodded and left, closing the door behind him and leaving her alone with her chaotic thoughts and her erratically beating heart. The shower was an almost surreal experience, with the hot water washing away not only the cold that still made her body shake, but also part of the tension that had accumulated in her shoulders since the moment she agreed to Aracelli's insane plan. Angie stood there under the shower longer than she should have, trying to organize her thoughts and failing miserably, because all she could think about was the way Vincent had protected her, the cold fury in his eyes when he confronted the waiter, the unexpected kindness when he placed the blazer over her shoulders. She chose a simple dress from Clarice's closet, something in soft tones that was comfortable and elegant at the same time, and when she looked at herself in the mirror with her still damp hair falling over her shoulders, she almost didn't recognize herself. She looked like a different version of herself, an Angie who frequented mansions and had dates at expensive restaurants, and the reality that she was there pretending to be her sister came back full force, making her stomach churn with guilt. 30 minutes after going upstairs, Angie came down the stairs slowly, holding onto the handrail as if that could somehow anchor her to reality, and found Vincent in the living room, sitting on a leather sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand, and that thoughtful expression that made him seem even more intimidating. He looked up when he heard her enter, and Angie saw the way his gaze traveled the length of her body before returning to her face, and she had to remind herself to breathe. "Better?" he asked, and there was something soft in his voice that completely contrasted with the coldness he had shown at the restaurant. "Yes, much better," Angie replied, standing there in the middle of the room not knowing exactly what to do, until he gestured for her to sit on the sofa across from his. She obeyed, sitting on the edge as if ready to run away at any moment. Sorry for everything. The date was a complete disaster. Vincent took a sip of whiskey, watching her over the rim of the glass, and then placed the drink on the coffee table with a controlled and precise movement. "So it wasn't your fault," he said with that absolute certainty that left no room for arguments. "Someone planned that deliberately." He paused, leaning slightly forward, and Angie felt the weight of those dark eyes on her. "And I want to know who and why." Panic rose up Angie's throat like bitter bile, because she knew exactly who had planned everything, knew that Aracelli was behind all that humiliation, but she couldn't tell him that without revealing the entire farce. "I don't know," she lied, hating the way her voice trembled slightly. "Maybe an angry ex, or someone jealous." "Jealous of what?" Vincent shot back, and there was a hardness in his tone that made Angie flinch slightly, but then he seemed to notice and sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as frustration. Sorry, that was rude. He stood up in a fluid movement and walked to a small bar in the corner of the room. Do you want tea? Coffee? Something stronger? Tea, if you have it, Angie replied, watching the way he moved with that natural confidence of someone completely comfortable in their own space, and then gathered courage to ask the question that had been burning on the tip of her tongue since they left the restaurant. Vincent, why did you help me? You seemed furious with me at the beginning of the date, and suddenly you were defending me. You could have just left. Vincent stopped what he was doing, his hands frozen over the electric kettle, and Angie saw the tension in his broad shoulders before he turned to look at her. The silence stretched for a moment that seemed infinite, and she almost thought he wouldn't answer. But then he let out the air slowly and leaned against the bar counter, crossing his arms over his chest. I don't know, he admitted, and there was a brutal honesty in those words that made something tighten in Angie's chest. Instinct, maybe. You seemed scared, vulnerable. He paused, and his gaze became distant for a second before refocusing on her with that intensity that left her breathless. And something in me couldn't leave you there. Alone. Humiliated. Angie felt the heat rise from her chest to her face and had to look away because that expression on his face was doing strange things to her heart. Thank you, she whispered. That's kind. Unexpected. And then, unable to hold back, she added, Araceli said you were cold. Distant. She realized the mistake the second the words left her mouth, saw Vincent frown and tilt his head slightly to the side, that confusion returning to his dark eyes. Araceli, he repeated slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. How do you know I know? And then he stopped, blinking as if he'd been hit by something. Wait, you are Araceli. Okay, now I think I've gone completely crazy. Angie froze completely, feeling the blood drain from her face as panic exploded in her chest, because how the hell had she been stupid enough to talk about herself in third person? Yes, she said too quickly, with a forced smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Sorry, I meant that you said that you're cold, to me, before, on other dates. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Angie could see the calculations happening behind those eyes, the clear distrust in every line of his expression. But then he just nodded slowly, apparently deciding to let it go. Okay, he said, going back to preparing the tea with controlled movements. And I'll be kinder to you from now on. You deserve it. The guilt Angie felt was so intense that for a moment she thought she was going to throw up, because there he was being genuinely kind, promising to be better, and she was lying to him with every breath, every word, every look. She squeezed her hands in her lap, trying to control the tremor that began to take over her fingers. The next 2 hours were the most confusing and wonderful that Angie had ever experienced in her life, because they talked in a way she had never talked with anyone, about books she loved, and that he admitted he never had time to read, about family in a vague way where she almost revealed about her complicated sister, but managed to hold back at the last second, about his work, building a real estate empire, while she listened attentively and fascinated by the passion she could hear in his voice even when talking about technical and business things. And Vincent seemed equally fascinated with her, leaning forward on the sofa with those dark eyes fixed on her face, as if trying to memorize every detail, every expression, every word that came out of her mouth. You're different, he finally said, and there was something reverent in his tone. You're not like I remembered. He paused, and Angie saw when he clenched his jaw as if carefully choosing his words. Before you were superficial. Today, you're deep, real. The guilt increased even more, if that was possible, and Angie felt tears threaten to burn her eyes, but held them back with pure willpower. People change, she offered weakly, and hated how that sounded like a question instead of a statement. So not that much, Vincent replied, and there was a hardness in his tone that softened when he continued. Not in days, not like this. He leaned even further forward, and suddenly the space between them seemed tiny, charged with a tension that made the air dense and hard to breathe. But I like it. This version. A lot. Angie had to bite her lip to keep the tears from falling, because there he was saying exactly what she wanted to hear, and at the same time the worst possible thing, because he liked her, The real Angie, not the Araceli he thought he was getting to know. "I like it too," she whispered, allowing herself to be honest for just one moment. "You, this night." Despite the horrible beginning, Vincent was silent for a moment, his eyes traveling over her face with that intensity that left her too vulnerable, and then he stood up in a smooth movement and approached her, stopping right next to the sofa where she was sitting. Angie had to tilt her head back to keep looking at him, and the proximity made her heart race uncontrollably. "So can I take you home?" he asked, but there was something in his voice that indicated that wasn't what he really wanted. "Or you can stay. Guest room. No pressure at all." He paused, and Angie saw when he swallowed hard, as if the next words cost him something. "You're tired, and I don't want you to go." "Not yet." Angie knew she should refuse, that staying there was a terrible idea for so many different reasons she couldn't even count them all. But her body was exhausted from the entire night of tension and conflicting emotions, and there was something in the way Vincent looked at her that made her want to stay, want to prolong that moment where she could pretend all of this was real. "I'll stay," she heard her own voice say. "Thank you." The smile that appeared on Vincent's face was small but genuine, and Angie realized it was probably rare to see that man truly smile, which made the moment even more special and painful at the same time. "Good," he said softly. "Thanks, good night, Araceli." And there it was, the wrong name sounding strange and out of place between them, and Angie felt a physical pain in her chest when she realized how wrong this was, how much she wanted him to say her name, the right name, but she couldn't. "Good night, Vincent," she replied, and had to look away quickly before he saw the tears that finally began to escape. Chapter 3. Araceli returns and blackmail activates.
I tell him the truth. She destroys everything.
The morning light came through the curtains of the guest room where Angie had slept, and for one blessed moment she forgot where she was, forgot all the mess she'd gotten herself into, until reality came back full force and she sat up in bed hugging her knees to her chest. She had slept at Vincent Ballard's house, the man who thought she was Araceli, the man who had been kind and protective and fascinating, and now she needed to leave before the lie became even bigger and more painful. She went down the stairs slowly, following the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen, and found Vincent standing there in front of the stove in dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. And there was something devastatingly attractive about seeing him like this, casual and relaxed in his own space, so different from the controlled and cold man she had seen at the restaurant. He turned his head when he heard her enter, and the small smile that appeared on his face made Angie's heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he said, and his voice was softer than she remembered, without that hardness he carried like armor. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Angie replied, leaning against the doorframe because she didn't trust her own legs at that moment. "Best night in months, actually." She paused, biting her lip before continuing. "Thank you for hosting me, for everything, really." Vincent nodded, turning his attention back to the coffee maker that was starting to make that familiar sound, and Angie took the moment to observe him without being too obvious, the way the muscles in his forearms moved under his skin when he reached for the cups in the cabinet, the way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead. "Always," he said, and then turned to her with that intensity in his gaze that left her breathless. "Tonight, do you want dinner? Again, redo the date. No disasters this time." Angie's chest tightened painfully because she wanted to. God knew how much she wanted to say yes, spend more time with him, talk like they had talked the night before. But she couldn't, because that would only make everything worse when the truth eventually came out. "I'd love to," she said, and saw the way his face lit up slightly before she had to continue. "But I can't tonight. Work." She swallowed hard, forcing a smile that probably didn't convince anyone. "But soon. I promise." She saw disappointment cross Vincent's face before he could hide it behind that mask of control he wore so well, and something in her wanted to take it back, wanted to say forget work, that she'd stay. But she held firm even when every cell in her body screamed to do the opposite. "Okay," he finally said, and the tone was carefully neutral. "Thomas, let me know when you can." Angie just nodded, not trusting her own voice, and when she left that mansion 15 minutes later, she felt like she was leaving a part of herself behind, and the broken heart she carried in her chest was a physical weight that made her want to collapse right there on the sidewalk. The small apartment she shared with Araceli had never seemed so claustrophobic as it did the moment Angie opened the door and found her twin sister pacing back and forth in the living room with her cell phone in her hand and a furious expression on the face identical to hers. Araceli turned in her direction so fast she almost tripped over her own feet, and the green eyes that were perfect copies of Angie's shone with a rage that made her instinctively take a step back. "Where were you?" Araceli practically screamed, and Angie saw her fingers squeeze the cell phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "I called you 1,000 times, 1,000, and you didn't answer any of them." "At his place," Angie replied, closing the door behind her and crossing her arms over her chest in a defensive posture that was already second nature when dealing with Araceli. "After your bucket of water, that you paid to dump on me." Angie saw the exact moment when Araceli decided to fake shock, her eyes widening theatrically and her free hand going to her chest in a dramatic gesture that would have been comical if it wasn't so pathetic. "What? I didn't do that. How can you accuse me of—" "The waiter told." Angie cut her off, feeling her own anger beginning to boil under her skin. "A blonde woman paid 500 for him to trip and dump water on me. It was you. I know it was." She took a step toward her sister and had the satisfaction of seeing Araceli back up slightly. "Why? Why would you do that to me?" The silence stretched for a tense moment, and then Araceli dropped the mask of shock, her shoulders relaxing as a cold smile appeared on her face, and Angie felt a chill run down her spine because she knew that smile, knew what it meant. "Because he was going to break up with me," Araceli said simply, as if that explained everything, as if humiliating her own sister was the most natural thing in the world. "I felt it, Angie. In the last few weeks, I saw the way he looked at me, like he was tired, bored. He was going to break up." She started pacing around the room again, and Angie followed her with her eyes, trying to process what she was hearing. "So I came up with a plan," Araceli continued, and there was a kind of perverse pride in her voice. "You'd go there, dressed humbly, no makeup, all shy and vulnerable, and you'd be publicly humiliated. I knew he'd feel sorry, that he'd see you so fragile and change his mind about breaking up." She stopped and turned to Angie with a victorious smile. "And it worked. It worked perfectly. He protected you, took you to his house, and now he thinks I changed, that I became vulnerable and need him." The anger Angie felt was so intense that for a moment she couldn't even speak. The words stuck in her throat as she looked at that distorted version of herself standing there with that expression of absolute satisfaction. "Then take over," she finally managed to say, her voice coming out louder than intended. "Go there. Be yourself. If he liked the change, keep the change." "No," Araceli responded immediately, and now there was a hardness in her tone that Angie recognized as dangerous. "Because he doesn't like me, Angie. He likes the version you created, that shy and sweet and vulnerable girl who talked to him about books and listened to him talk about work like it was the most fascinating thing in the world." She took a step toward Angie, and her eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating. "So you're going to continue? You're going to keep pretending to be me until I get what I want?" "Which is?" Angie asked, though she already knew the answer, could already see in Araceli's greedy eyes exactly what she wanted. "Money," Araceli said without any shame, counting on her fingers as if making a shopping list. "Expensive gifts, trips. He's rich, Angie. Filthy rich. And you're going to help me get all of that from him." She paused, and the smile that appeared on her face was something out of a nightmare. "Or I tell about Emma, about the fraud, about how they used her identity to sign fake documents, about how she could go to prison if this is exposed. Everything." Angie felt the blood drain from her face, panic exploding in her chest with such force that for a moment she thought she was going to faint. "You wouldn't do that," she whispered. But even to her own ears it sounded unconvincing because she knew Araceli knew her sister was capable of anything to get what she wanted. "I would," Araceli confirmed, and there wasn't an ounce of doubt in her voice. "And I will. If you don't obey, if you don't do exactly what I tell you, I'll tell everything. I'll show the photos I have of her signing those documents. I'll call the police. I'll destroy her life." She tilted her head to the side, studying the horrified expression on Angie's face. "So, you pretend to be me when I say, you ask for expensive things in my name, and you don't tell anyone anything. Understood?" Tears burned Angie's eyes, but she held them back with pure willpower, refusing to give Araceli the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Understood," she said, and the word came out bitter, as gall on her tongue. "Great," Araceli said with false cheer, as if they had just made plans for a pleasant lunch instead of Angie having just agreed to blackmail. "Now I'm back, as me, the real Araceli, and you." She grabbed her purse and walked to the door, stopping only to look at Angie over her shoulder. "Only show up when I say, and don't even think about telling Vincent anything. Because if you do, Emma pays the price." The door closed behind Araceli with a final sound that echoed through the empty apartment, and it was only then that Angie collapsed, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor as sobs finally escaped her throat. She had fallen in love with Vincent Ballard, completely and irrevocably, and now she was trapped in a web of lies that only got tighter every day, and there was no way out that wouldn't destroy someone she loved. The next day dawned grey and cold, matching Angie's mood perfectly as she tried to concentrate on work at the library, but failed miserably, because all she could think about was Vincent and the way he had smiled at her, the unexpected kindness, the conversations that flowed so naturally between them. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she almost didn't hear when Emma approached her desk with a worried expression. But before she could talk to her friend, Angie's cell phone vibrated with a message from Araceli that simply said, "He's calling. Stay quiet." And then, as if on cue, the house phone started ringing. Angie imagined Araceli picking up her cell phone with that victorious smile, and could almost hear the change in tone when her sister answered, her voice coming out all sugary and confident in a way that was pure Araceli. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she knew exactly what was happening. Could imagine Vincent on the other end of the line, confused by the sudden change. Vincent Ballard was in his office when he called the number he had saved as Araceli, and the part of him that was logical and rational said he was acting like an idiot, calling less than 24 hours after seeing her. But the other part, the one that had spent the entire night replaying every moment of their conversation, couldn't hold back. "Hi, baby. Miss me?" The voice that answered made him frown immediately, because it sounded completely different from the shy and soft woman who had been at his house the night before. "Araceli," he asked slowly, feeling that familiar confusion beginning to settle in. "Are you okay? Your voice sounds different." "I'm great, why?" The answer came too quick and animated, and Vincent had to move the phone away from his ear when she practically screamed the next part. "Let's have dinner. Tonight, I'll pick the place." Vincent ran his hand over his face and trying to understand what the hell was happening, because this wasn't the same woman. It couldn't be. The change was too drastic. "Okay," he said slowly, "but yesterday you said you worked, that you couldn't go out. Today you're already free." "I changed my mind," came the answer, with that forced cheerfulness that made something uncomfortable settle in Vincent's stomach. "Work is boring. I'd rather go out with you. I'll pick you up at 8. "Okay," Vincent repeated, because he didn't know what else to say. And when he hung up the phone, he sat there staring at the screen for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. That wasn't the woman who had talked to him about books, who had listened attentively while he talked about real estate projects, who had looked at him with that vulnerability in her eyes that made him want to protect her. But at the same time, it was the same number, the same person, supposedly. The dinner was a disaster of epic proportions, and Vincent knew it the moment he saw Araceli enter the restaurant she had chosen, a flashy and noisy place that was everything he hated. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight and too short, the heavy makeup making her eyes look smaller. And when she waved at him from across the restaurant, practically shouting his name, Vincent felt several pairs of eyes turn in their direction. She threw herself into the chair across from him, with a lack of grace that completely contrasted with the smooth and almost shy movements of the night before, and started talking before he could even say hello, her voice too loud for the environment as she told a story about a saleswoman at an expensive store. "And then I told her, 'I want it. Price doesn't matter. Buy it,'" Araceli said, laughing loudly in a shrill way, and Vincent had to hold himself back from grimacing. He stayed silent, just watching her with that analytical attention he used in business, trying to understand what the hell was happening, because this didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "You're very different," he finally said, interrupting her in the middle of another shopping story. "From yesterday." "What do you mean?" Araceli asked, batting her eyes at him in an exaggerated way that was probably supposed to be seductive, but just seemed uncomfortable. "I asked yesterday you were shy, kind deep." Vincent leaned forward, studying every micro-expression on her face. "Today you're—" He paused, choosing his words. "Not you. Different. Did something happen?" Angie saw Araceli falter for just a second before recovering her composure, the smile returning to her face full force. "Oh, yesterday I was sick, tired, all week." She laughed again, that loud sound that made Vincent want to leave immediately. "Today I'm better. Normal. This is the real me." Vincent didn't buy it for a second, but he also didn't know what to think, what to do with that information. So he just nodded and let the night follow its tortuous and uncomfortable course. And when he finally dropped Araceli off at home hours later, he sat in the car looking at the building for a long moment, with that unsettling feeling that he was missing some crucial piece of the puzzle.
All I know is that when the truth comes completely to light, chaos is going to happen in this story.
Chapter 4. Clarisse Suspects and Secret Revealed.
2 faces, 2 personalities. So which one did I fall in love with?
The weeks that followed were a torture meticulously orchestrated by Araceli, and Angie found herself living 2 lives that didn't belong to her, alternating between being herself, pretending to be her sister, and simply not existing while Araceli took control. The pattern was simple and cruel. Araceli sent her on dates with Vincent whenever she wanted something expensive requested in her name, and on other days, she went herself to keep up appearances and make sure Vincent didn't forget he was still technically dating her. Vincent was visibly confused, and Angie could see it in every look he gave her on the days when it was really her there, that expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle and failing miserably. He asked questions she couldn't answer honestly, pointed out inconsistencies she had to make up flimsy excuses to justify, and with each lie that came out of her mouth, Angie felt a piece of her own heart shatter. It was on a Thursday night that everything really started to fall apart, when Vincent invited her to dinner at his house with his sister Clarisse. And Araceli had been quick to send Angie to go in her place, because according to her words, family is boring but important to keep him interested. Angie arrived at Vincent's mansion with her stomach churning with nervousness, wearing a simple dress that Araceli had approved with disgust but allowed, and when the door opened, she found herself face to face with a beautiful woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes that studied her with immediate curiosity. "So you're the famous Araceli," Clarisse said with a warm smile. And there was something so genuine in that smile that Angie felt the guilt tighten even more in her chest. "Vincent won't stop talking about you, though he'll never admit it out loud." The dinner was surprisingly pleasant, with Angie finding herself relaxing in Clarisse's presence in a way she didn't expect, talking about books and work and helping in the kitchen in a way that made Vincent's sister practically glow with happiness. Vincent spent most of the time watching the 2 of them with that thoughtful expression Angie was starting to recognize. And when Clarisse turned to him with wide eyes of excitement, Angie knew what was coming. "Vincent, she's amazing. Where have you been hiding her all this time?" Clarisse practically shouted, and there was a genuine joy there that made Angie have to look away. Vincent took a sip of wine before responding, and there was something tired in his voice when he spoke. "She's unpredictable," he said slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. "Sometimes she's like this, kind and real. Sometimes she's the complete opposite." "Opposite how?" Clarisse frowned, looking between her brother and Angie with clear confusion on her face. "Superficial, selfish, annoying," Vincent listed bluntly, and Angie saw when he clenched his jaw. "I don't understand. She changes constantly, like they're completely different people." Clarisse was silent for a long moment, those intelligent eyes studying Angie with an attention that made her uncomfortable, and then she leaned forward with a genuinely concerned expression. "That's very strange, Vincent. Too strange." She paused, biting her lip. "Does she have a split personality? That exists, you know. Dissociative identity disorder." The following week was when Clarisse met the real Araceli, and Angie knew this because she received a furious call from Vincent in the middle of the afternoon asking what the hell had happened to her. Apparently, Araceli had gone to lunch with Clarisse and had been so rude, demanding and frankly unbearable that Vincent's sister had called him in the middle of lunch, asking him to come get her because she couldn't take it anymore. "Last week you were an angel," Clarice had said to Vincent afterwards, and Angie heard all of this through the phone while Vincent recounted the conversation with a tense voice. Today, she was an absolute demon. What happened? Is she two different people? Vincent had sighed deeply on the call, and Angie could hear the exhaustion weighing in every word. "I know, Clarice. I know it doesn't make sense. She changes all the time and I'm confused and tired." There was a long pause, and when he continued, his voice was lower, almost vulnerable. "But when she's kind, when she's like she was on that first date and at dinner with you, I fell in love. Completely." Angie had to hang up the phone and run to the bathroom because she thought she was going to throw up from so much guilt and pain. Because there he was admitting he fell in love with her, with the real Angie, and she was destroying him with lies day after day. She didn't know that Clarice had decided at that exact moment to hire a private detective to investigate. Didn't know that the net was closing around her and Araceli faster and faster. It was just a few days later that Araceli sent the message Angie dreaded, ordering her to go to Vincent's office and ask for an expensive Tiffany necklace, saying exactly which model she wanted and how many diamonds it should have. Angie tried to argue, tried to say that was too wrong, but Araceli just sent a photo of Emma with documents in hand, and the implicit threat was clear enough. Angie entered Vincent's office with tears already burning her eyes, and he stood up from his desk immediately when he saw her, that instant concern on his face that only made everything hurt even more. "What's wrong?" he asked, already coming around the desk to get to her. Vincent, I need to tell you something," Angie began. And the words came out broken because she wanted so badly to spill everything, tell the whole truth, free herself from that prison of lies that was slowly suffocating her. Vincent stopped in front of her, his hands automatically going to her arms in a comforting gesture. "Tell me. Whatever it is, you can tell me." That's when Angie's phone vibrated in her pocket, and with trembling hands she pulled it out to see Araceli's message that simply said, "Talk and Emma goes to prison." Photos of her signing fake documents. "I have them. Choose." Attached was a photo of Emma in some office with papers in hand, and Angie felt all the air escape her lungs at once. The tears fell full force, and she had to look away from Vincent because she couldn't bear to see the genuine concern in his eyes. "Nothing," she whispered, and the word came out like ground glass. "Forget it. She swallowed hard, forcing the next words out even as she felt herself dying inside. "Can I ask you for something? A gift?" She saw when Vincent's expression changed, the concern giving way to something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Of course," he said, and there was a softness there that broke Angie's heart. "What do you want?" "A necklace," Angie forced the words out, hating every syllable. "From Tiffany, with diamonds." She paused, closing her eyes because she couldn't look at him. "Sorry, I know it's expensive, but I really wanted it and—" "Okay," Vincent cut her off, and when Angie opened her eyes, she found a completely different expression on his face. The softness had disappeared, replaced by something cold and distant she had never seen directed at her before. "I'll buy it." He stepped away, returning behind the desk with stiff movements. "Anything else?" The tone was so icy that Angie felt it like a physical slap, and the tears came back with renewed force. "No," she whispered. "Sorry, I'll go." She practically ran out of the office, sobs escaping uncontrolled as the elevator descended, and didn't see when Vincent collapsed in his chair with his head in his hands, his heart broken for the first time in his life, because he was absolutely certain she was going to tell him something important, something real. And in the end, all she wanted was his money, like all the others. On the same day, Clarice Ballard was passing by a cafe downtown when she saw something that made her freeze in the middle of the sidewalk. Two identical women, absolutely identical, entering the establishment together, laughing at something one of them had said. Clarice blinked several times, thinking she was seeing things, but no. There they were, two Aracelis side by side. "Twins," she whispered to herself. And then the sharp lawyer's mind began connecting the dots at frightening speed. The personality changes, the inconsistencies, the way Vincent said she was a different person on different days. It wasn't split personality. It was literally two people. With trembling hands, Clarice pulled out her phone and took several photos of the two women through the cafe window, and then ran to Vincent's office like her life depended on it. She burst through his office door without even knocking, and Vincent stood up with an alarmed expression that quickly transformed into confusion when he saw his sister. "Brother, you have to see this," Clarice practically screamed, running to his desk and shoving her phone in his face. Look at this." Vincent took the phone, and Clarice saw the exact moment when his brain processed what he was seeing in the photos. Two identical women side by side talking in a cafe. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice came out strange, tense. "Twins," Clarice responded, and she was practically jumping with agitation. "Two Aracellis. Or rather, one is Araceli and the other is someone else. This explains everything. The changes, the different personalities. It was two people this whole time." Vincent was silent, looking at the photos with an expression Clarice had never seen on her brother's face before, something that mixed fury and pain and betrayal in a way that scared her. When he finally spoke, his voice came out dangerously low. "Give me the address," he said. "Where they are, now."
Damn, now I want to see what Vincent's going to do.
Chapter 5. Confrontation. Truth and Reconciliation.
If what I felt was real,
Then prove it, no lies.
The cafe was relatively empty when Vincent walked through the door with an expression that made several people instinctively move out of his way, and Angie felt the blood drain from her face the moment she saw him because she just knew that the house of cards had finally collapsed. He stopped a few steps from the table where she and Araceli were sitting, his dark eyes traveling over their identical faces with an intensity that was almost physical. And the silence that followed was so heavy, Angie thought she was going to suffocate. "So," Vincent finally said, and his voice came out too controlled, too cold, the kind of calm that came before the storm. "Two twins." He crossed his arms over his chest, and Angie saw the way his jaw was clenched, as if he was using all his self-control not to explode right there. "Which is which?" Angie and Araceli froze completely, and it was Araceli who reacted first, that fake smile appearing on her face with the speed of someone who had spent their entire life lying. "Vincent, what a surprise," she tried, her voice coming out forcedly cheerful. "This is my sister, Angie. Surprise. I was going to introduce you, but you—" Vincent cut her off, but he wasn't looking at Araceli. He was looking directly at Angie with that intensity that always left her breathless, except now there was pain in that look, and anger, and betrayal. "You're the one from the first date, from the restaurant, from the water bucket, from my house. Right?" Angie couldn't do anything but nod, feeling tears already burning her eyes, and when she tried to speak, her voice came out broken. "Yes?" "And your name?" Vincent asked, though she knew he already knew the answer, that he just wanted to hear it from her mouth. "Angie," she whispered, and had to look away because she couldn't bear the way he was looking at her. "Angie Hart." Vincent finally turned his attention to Araceli, and the expression on his face was something Angie had never seen before, an absolute coldness that made even her sister recoil slightly in her chair. "And you're Araceli, the real one, the annoying one, the superficial one." He paused, and when he continued, there was something dangerous in his voice. "You tricked me, for weeks." "Why?" "Because I wanted," Araceli began, but Angie interrupted her, unable to continue with the lies for even one more second. "Because she blackmailed me." The words exploded from Angie with full force, and she turned to Vincent with tears running freely down her face. "I didn't want to, I swear I didn't want to. She has a secret about my best friend, about fraud, about fake documents, and threatened to expose everything if I didn't pretend to be her." Vincent was silent, processing that, and then slowly turned to Araceli with an expression of absolute disgust. "You blackmailed your own sister, to trick me. Why?" And Araceli, to her credit or lack thereof, didn't try to lie this time, just shrugged with that casual coldness that always made Angie wonder if there was something wrong with her sister. "Because you were going to break up with me. I felt it. So I came up with a plan, sent Angie in my place all vulnerable and humiliated so you'd feel sorry and not break up." She smiled, and there was something cruel in that smile. "And then I'd exploit you, take your gifts, your money, your trips." She pointed at Angie. "And she did it. She wanted it too. She asked for that expensive necklace past, didn't she?" "I didn't want to," Angie screamed, standing up from her chair so fast it almost tipped over. "You forced me. You threatened Emma. I never wanted to do any of this." "Leave," Vincent said suddenly, and his voice was so low and controlled, it was scarier than if he were shouting. "Both of you, out of my sight. Never talk to me again or I'll sue. For fraud, emotional and financial. Understood?" Angie felt her world collapse completely and threw herself in his direction with desperation. "Vincent, please, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to do this to you. I fell in love with you for real from that first night, and I wanted to tell you, but she threatened Emma and I didn't know what to do and—" "You lied," Vincent cut her off, and there was something broken in his voice that made Angie's heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "For weeks, I fell in love with a lie. With you, but with a version that maybe doesn't even exist." He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, there was only emptiness there. "Go, before I say something worse." Angie tried to say something else, but the words died in her throat when she saw his expression, and then she just ran, left that cafe with sobs tearing through her chest, and didn't look back. 3 weeks passed like a blur of pain for Angie, and she could barely get out of bed most days, going to work on autopilot and coming back to cry on the couch until she fell asleep from exhaustion. Emma tried to comfort her, but there was little she could do besides be there, and Angie felt like she had destroyed the only chance at real happiness she'd ever had. It was Clarice who changed everything, showing up at Angie's apartment door on a Thursday afternoon with Emma at her side and a determined expression on her face. She had investigated everything, found Emma, heard the complete story about the involuntary fraud and how her boss had used her identity without permission, and as a lawyer had immediately offered legal help. "You're not going to prison," Clarice said to Emma with absolute conviction. "I promise. We'll prove it was your boss, yes, we'll clear your name completely." And then she had gone to Vincent and told him everything, every detail she had discovered, and Angie knew this when she heard the knock on the door 3 days later and opened it to find Vincent standing there with an expression that mixed guilt and hope, in a way that made her heart give a painful leap. "Can I come in?" he asked, and Angie just nodded, because she didn't trust her own voice. They sat in the small living room, and silence stretched for a moment before Vincent spoke, the words coming out careful and heavy. "Clarice told me everything. Emma, the fraud, the blackmail, Araceli forcing you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Angie, I'm sorry for not listening, for sending you away without giving you a chance to explain." "I should have told you earlier," Angie replied, tears already starting to fall. "But Emma, prison, I was so scared and—" "I know," Vincent interrupted gently, "and Clarice is going to help Emma. She's not going to prison, I promise." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was lower, more vulnerable. "And that night at my house and when we talked, you were real. I fell in love with you, with the real Angie, not the lie." He reached out, taking her hand carefully, "And I still am. In love. If you still feel something for me, can we start over? Real, no lies, no Araceli, just us." Angie couldn't respond with words, just threw herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest while he held her tight. "I never stopped loving you," she finally managed to say, "and yes, start over, please." The kiss that followed was everything Angie had dreamed of and more, real and honest and completely theirs, with no lies to poison it, no masks to hide behind. Months later, Angie found herself sitting in an elegant restaurant with Clarice and Emma, the three of them laughing at something Emma had said, and she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so genuinely happy. "You're the best friends I've ever had," Emma said, raising her wineglass in a toast. "And you're my best client," Clarice responded with a smile. "Case closed. Boss in prison. You completely free." "And I have a real family," Angie added, feeling tears of happiness burn her eyes. "You two. Vincent." She paused. "And Araceli." "Tried to sue Vincent for emotional damages," Clarice said with a mischievous smile. "Lost badly. Judge prohibited her from contacting us. Forever." Later that night, Angie was on the balcony of Vincent's mansion looking at the stars when she felt his arms wrap around her from behind. "Happy?" he asked softly against her hair. "Very," she replied, turning in his arms. You, Emma free, Clarice as a friend, Araceli far away. Perfect. Almost perfect, Vincent said, and then he was kneeling, pulling a small box from his pocket. This is missing. Angie brought her hands to her mouth, tears already running down her face as she looked at the ring that sparkled under the balcony light. Angie Hart, right twin, love of my life, will you marry me, real, forever? Yes, Angie screamed, pulling him up and kissing him with all the happiness she felt exploding in her chest. Always yes. From inside the house, Clarice and Emma watched through the window, hugging and crying with happiness, and when Vincent put the ring on Angie's finger, the two screamed in celebration. The wrong twin had gone to the date, but the right person had found true love.
Author's note. Hello, my loves. This is Kay, and I have to confess that this story was born from a chaotic mix of insomnia, too much coffee, and that question that wouldn't let me sleep. What if the wrong person went to the date, but ended up being the right person? I've always been fascinated by twins and switched identities, but I wanted to escape the cute cliché. I wanted pain. I wanted tension. I wanted you to scream at the page because Araceli is simply unbearable. Creating her was therapeutic because I channeled all the anger I've ever felt toward manipulative people in real life. Angie, on the other hand, is everything I'd like to be, kind even when hurt. Vincent was my biggest challenge. He needed to be cold enough to be intimidating, but vulnerable enough to win us over. That water bucket scene? I wrote it crying because his protection is everything a woman deserves. The blackmail with Emma came from real conversations with friends about how far we'd go to protect those we love. It's scary and beautiful at the same time. I hope you loved reading it as much as I loved writing it. Angie and Vincent deserve everything good. And Araceli? Well, screw her. And if you want to see another chaotic story, click on the video that's appearing on your screen now.